Chapter 4 of Poppy Playtime brought us new characters, deeper lore, fresh mysteries, and even more secrets. Just when you think you've seen it all, there's still plenty to find from this seemingly abandoned toy factory. Today, I'm going to show you 10 things you missed in Chapter 4. The lore of Poppy Playtime has often relied heavily on dialogue between characters, and this chapter is no different. We get to see tapes featuring reoccurring characters such as Rich and Leith Pierre, but we're also introduced to previously unseen ones such as the elusive Eddie Ritterman and Dr. Bruno White. However, it's not just from these tapes that we can uncover fresh details pertaining to the lore. Like in Chapter 3, we're occasionally exposed to the infamous red smoke, which is known for inducing hallucinations, something that we've been subjected to ourselves. During our first encounter with the smoke, various lines can be heard in the background which appear to be remnants of a conversation. We faintly hear, "I've had it with this place. I'm out of here. I'm not afraid of you anymore." Now, while this is not the same format as the usual tape dialogues, considering this is a very limited selection of a conversation, it has a tremendous impact on what it could mean for the lore. Shortly after Chapter 3 was released, the Orientation Handbook was also released, introducing us to a character named PW. Since then, his character has been a key candidate for the identity of the character. At the back of the handbook, we see that PW tried to quit on the 3rd of August, but was convinced to stay. The snippet of this conversation lines up with these events, which potentially could be providing us more evidence that we're playing as PW. Regardless, it's a great piece of information to have, and due to its faint sounds, which are also obstructed by heavy background noises, it's not surprising that many players may have missed this. Another secret which gave us further insight into a character is the hidden room of Dr. Harley Sawyer himself. Players may have missed this room as the keycard to access it was guarded by 2 of Sawyer's robots. However, if you were able to grab the keycard and enter the room, you were exposed to a plethora of lore. The main piece of evidence which stood out was the tape between Sawyer and the prototype titled Time. This is important for 2 reasons. One, we learn that despite the two seeming to be at odds with each other in the previous chapter, they're now working with one another. However, you could hardly call this a harmonious reunion. 2. Both the title of the tape and its contents give a huge insight into what the prototype is working towards. He's continuing the experiments which were done during the Bigger Bodies initiative, and most importantly, he's running out of time. We can only speculate as to what this means and how it's going to impact the story in Chapter 5, but it's still fascinating to know nonetheless, and gives us a further understanding of both the prototype and Harley Sawyer. The room also shows notes which were found in the Chapter 4 ARG, specifically the letter where Elliot Ludwig removed Sawyer from the Young Geniuses program many years ago. It shows us that Sawyer's arrogance and hubris have always been a fundamental part of his character, which ultimately led to his own downfall. A radio in the room cements this fact even further by blatantly showing Sawyer's recklessness and complete disdain for the children from his own mouth, asking things such as what would they have been otherwise, as if these are not real living, breathing children. There are also moments outside of Sawyer's room which gives us more of a look into his character. While this was discussed during the Chapter 4 ARG, more information was given during Chapter 4 with the 93 Theater incident tape. Little is known about this specific incident outside of it being the final straw for Sawyer and ultimately leading to his demise. If players were able to find this tape, they would get an insight into the scale of the incident as it killed a minimum of 78 people. It's not all doom and gloom though. Since Chapter 1, a fairly innocuous lemon can be found throughout the factory. It has been referenced on death scenes, seen in key moments of the series, and even has its own voice lines. Limon returns once again in Chapter 4, both in 2D and 3D formats. The former can be seen drawn on the wall in Safe Haven, but the latter can be found at the start of the game when the player makes their way down to the prison and encounters Sawyer and his incredibly unfriendly pets for the first time. If you remove the wood panels which are covering a hole in one of the prison rooms, if you turn to your right, you can see everyone's favorite citrus fruit with more voice lines and adorable eyes added. Another adorable character also has a few details many may have missed. If you look closely at Yarnaby's body with a free camera, you can see that he's covered in scars. Where these cuts and injuries came from, we don't know, but we can certainly make some guesses. We know that Yarnaby and Sawyer were separated after Sawyer's removal, but we also know that Sawyer had already forced Yarnaby to be his guard cat prior to this. This means that Yarnaby could have been subjected to numerous tests and even abuse to ensure that he would be strong enough to protect his master. It could also imply that Yarnaby played a role in the Hour of Joy. We're not entirely sure where he was and whether he had any part in the killings, but the extensive scars over his body could certainly be good evidence to point to him being involved in some way. There are also other moments in Chapter 4 which give us a huge amount of information despite potentially being easily missed by players, especially if they weren't directly looking for lore. For example, the small pieces of dialogue we get from the toys tells us so much. In Safe Haven, you have a number of smaller versions of the smiling critters. These versions seem far more cognitive than their larger predecessors and are actually alive. We hear them make references to us, the player, the doctor, and their chronic and painful hunger and, interestingly, their disdain for Poppy. Throughout the series, we've seen repeated hostility toward Poppy from those in the factory. Of course, we're not sure why, but there are even more details which build on this, which we'll discuss later. Another great source of information which players may have missed is the art on the walls of Safe Haven. The art gives us an eerie sense of the mindset of the toys and acts as a tool for them to vent their frustrations and relay their memories. Remember, not all the toys can speak, so this could be their only way to communicate. For example, we see the children draw themselves surrounded by red smoke and Catnap begging for help and repeatedly screaming no. This shows us that some of the kids vividly remember their lives before their transformation and the process itself. This is also something Dowie himself would confirm due to his chronic fear of the gentle voices which were played during the experiments as a sick way to soothe the kids. There's also a giant drawing of the hand of the prototype dangling a child by their leg, showing that the prototype is still very much despised by some of the toys, despite his attempt to kill all those he deemed traitors. Again, we see more references to the ongoing hunger of the toys, how they miss their parents, and their hatred for Poppy. From the very first chapter, we see that whoever is in the factory does not have a good opinion on Poppy. Her room is covered with graffiti telling us to go back, the vent where Huggy chases us has writing saying stay away from her, she can't be trusted, and a few more. Well, Chapter 4 is no different either. On the same wall art, we see an image of Poppy which is furiously crossed out stating how she left us, them, despite the fact that they needed her. While this does give us some additional context as to why the other toys may hate Poppy, it does seem like a direct contradiction. The wall art suggests that the toys in Safe Haven don't know where she is. However, we know that there are toys in the factory who know exactly where she is, and they're doing all they can to warn people away from her. We won't know the full truth until the end of the series, but for now, this is a great piece of information which tells us more about the namesake of the franchise. The dark themes of Poppy Playtime don't end there, however. We finally get a rare sight of toys eating what appears to be chicken, but it's not. It's Dog Day. Yeah, the toys are engaging in full-blown cannibalism either out of necessity or sick desire. Like Riley, Dog Day also had a skeletal structure allowing for him to have meat which toys are feasting from. It's not just Dog Day who's subjected to this though. We're introduced to Dowie by him viciously grabbing Pianosaurus and having his first meal in weeks. But how? Out-of-bounds footage showed Dowie's multiple extended arms reached out to grab the musical dinosaur and throw him around the room before he was finally consumed by Dowie. Although he never fully transitioned into his monster form, it was still really cool to see how those features of Dowie's monster form were seen so early on in the chapter. What was your favorite secret this chapter? Did we miss anything? Let me know in the comments. Also, check out this next video here and subscribe.